Hello, I'm so glad that you're joining me today. It's Sunday afternoon, it's June the 7th, and I'm in the office, and I would like to give us a few words of encouragement today, as we've been doing, as we study through the book of 1 Peter. In 1 Peter chapter 3, beginning at verse 18, we'll be reading today, and we'll go ahead and read through the end of the chapter, and I think we'll find a really important message of encouragement there. Let's read together. 1 Peter 3, beginning at verse 18. For Christ also suffered, once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit, in which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, because they formerly did not obey, when God's patience waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is, 8 persons, were brought safely through water. Baptism, which corresponds to this, now saves you, not as a removal of dirt from the body, but as an appeal to God for a good conscience through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God, with angels, authorities, and powers having been subjected to him. There's some really important things here. This is not the easiest passage throughout the book of 1 Peter, but there's some really obvious things that gives us some things to think about that can brighten our day-to-day and can help us to face the challenges that are there. First of all, he had been talking about suffering, and he says it's better to suffer for doing right than for doing wrong. Hopefully the Christian lives such a life that people don't want him to have to suffer, don't want to persecute you, don't want to harm you, don't want to do anything that would cause your life to be any more difficult. But he said that sometimes that does happen, and so you need to always be ready to suffer for what's right, but never be an evildoer, a wrongdoer, and suffer for what's wrong. He says here that when you do that, you are like Christ. Christ suffered unjustly. The righteous for the unrighteous. He suffered to bring us to God. And here's a great point, is that when we are suffering, when we face tribulation, difficulties, circumstances that are unpleasant to us, that especially when that's because of our faith, that we're being like Christ. We're suffering unjustly. Certainly not to the degree that he did, but in a small way, we are being like him. We're being blessed in that sense, that we're privileged to live up to that kind of suffering like Christ did. Would you notice also here that he talks about Noah as an example of when God saved a few. God saved Noah, his wife, his 3 sons and their wives, a total of 8 people, even though the rest of the world was destroyed. Now here's the great thing to think about, that if you are a faithful Christian, it doesn't matter how awful the world gets. You don't want to see that, but even if the entire world, even if everyone else is doing wrong, here we're told that God will remember us, God will see us, and just like he saved only 8 souls in that great flood, when the rest of the world was destroyed, we see that God has promised that if we'll be faithful to him, that we'll be saved. And he talks about baptism here, that when you become a Christian, when you're baptized into Christ, when you have the forgiveness of sins that comes when we're baptized into Christ, when we're added to the family of God here, we enter into that very special relationship. And so we can see that is a very important part of this. And then at the end of this chapter, he talks about Jesus, that after he suffered for a while, and after he did all the work that was given him to do, he went to the right hand of God, and everything was subjected to him. And you know what? We want to follow Jesus. We want to follow him through this life. If we have to suffer, we want to suffer in the faithfulness that Jesus suffered in. If we live on daily, being faithful to him, we want to do like Jesus did. We want to be faithful in all things that we possibly can. And here we see that as we follow him in the way we live, we follow him when we have to suffer, we follow him in joy, we follow him in the work that we have to do, that we also want to follow him into eternal life. And we want to be at the right hand of the Father in heaven. So there's some great words of encouragement today. Don't forget these 3 things we've talked about today from 1 Peter 3, 18 through 22. When you have to suffer, even for doing wrong, you're like Christ. You are in a small way like him. You are experiencing and you're faithfully serving God even though there is persecution. When we see there also that when you're faithful to God, even if everyone around you is doing wrong, you can know that God will save you. He will not judge the others around you and just lump you in. But like Noah, if you'll be faithful, you can look forward to eternal life. And we want to follow Jesus in the way we live, and as we live through this life, and whatever we endure, that we'll do it faithfully, and then follow him into eternity when he comes back for us. Really appreciate so much that you've watched today and that you've observed these truths. Hope that you'll continue to study along. My name is Paul Adams, and this has been 5 Minutes of Encouragement.